The rain hammered against the windows of my Seattle condo, the storm drumming as if it had existed long before the clouds above the sound. I sat slouched on the couch, my laptop open at my side, struggling through a proposal that refused to come together. Then, sharp and sudden, my phone buzzed. A new voice memo. Without hesitation, I tapped play, expecting a reminder I'd left for myself or maybe a client's update. But it was Nathan's voice that filled the room. Mom, I've been thinking about what we discussed. Scarlett isn't dependable. She's reckless, careless. If you want the house and the accounts protected, everything needs to be in my name. I'll manage it. She doesn't have the judgment for this. The words struck like blows, each one knotting tighter in my stomach. 27 seconds. That's all it took to unravel decades of carefully maintained peace. I froze, staring into the dark glass of the window, my reflection pale and unfamiliar. He hadn't meant for me to hear this. He thought he was whispering safely to our mother, once again reshaping her view of me. This wasn't just sibling rivalry anymore. It wasn't the usual back and forth of pride and blame. It was deliberate, a plan sharpened to cut me out of my own family story. The memo ended with a hollow silence, leaving me alone with a truth I could never unhear. I saved the file, set the phone on the table, and leaned back, already knowing tomorrow would not meet the same version of me. By morning, the storm outside had thinned to a drizzle, but inside, the weight of Nathan's voice pressed heavier than any cloud. It pulled me back through years that had been quietly preparing me for this moment. Burlington, Vermont. Our childhood unfolded along tree-lined streets where everyone seemed to know my brother's name. Nathan, the lacrosse captain, the charmer teachers adored even when his homework was late. I was the girl with perfect grades, spending lunches in the library. People remembered his goals, not my scholarships. Mom loved us both, but her pride always seemed to glow brighter when she spoke of him. Nathan is a leader, she'd beam at parent-teacher nights. About me, she'd smile softly and add, Scarlett is dependable. She didn't mean harm, but those words carved an invisible line between brilliance and background. That pattern followed us into adulthood. When property taxes came due on Mom's old house near Church Street, I was the one on the phone with the assessor's office, straightening out late fees and forms. Yet at Thanksgiving, Nathan would raise his glass and boast, "Don't worry, I paid the taxes again this year." Mom's eyes shone and I stayed silent. He had perfected this rhythm. Public praise to keep me quiet, private whispers to cast me as weak. At family dinners, he'd lean toward Mom, murmuring just loud enough, Scarlett works too much. She forgets things. I worry about her stress. I'd chew slowly, pretending it didn't matter, while his words kept trimming away at my place in the family. And now, with the memo still echoing, I saw those years for what they were, rehearsals. The humiliations I let slide had laid the groundwork for this betrayal. Nathan had been scripting the family narrative for decades, and I had followed the role he assigned without protest. But in my Seattle condo, proof saved on my phone, I knew the script was about to change, and this time, I wouldn't recite his lines. The older I grew, the easier it was to mistake Nathan's judgments for truth. They always came disguised as concern. He'd glance at my grocery bags when I dropped them off at Mom's house and shake his head. Do you really need to spend that much on fresh produce, Scarlett? Half of it will spoil. When I reminded him most of it was for Mom, he sighed, as if I were wasteful instead of caring. At first, I brushed it off, but soon the critiques multiplied. He questioned the hours I worked, suggesting I wasn't contributing enough, then accused me of being too career-driven to be there for Mom. When her prescriptions had to be adjusted, he told her I was careless for missing early signs. The bruises he left weren't on my skin, but in the shrinking confidence I had in my own choices. I began double-checking every receipt, rereading medical notes, rehearsing explanations before I spoke. And then the numbers spoke louder than his words. One evening, reviewing Mom's bank statements, I noticed recurring withdrawals to Nathan's LLC. Small at first, $100 here, $200 there, but steady like a siphon. Over 6 months, nearly $5,000 gone. When I confronted him, he laughed softly, patronizing. Scarlett, you misread the statements. Those are reimbursements for expenses I covered. You wouldn't understand, it's complicated. He tilted his head, polished as ever. For a moment, I almost believed him. But the pit in my stomach told me otherwise. I couldn't show Mom, not yet. Shattering her trust in her son was unbearable. But silence would make me his accomplice. I folded the statements into a folder, the paper edges cutting my palm. A reminder that truth is sharp, no matter how tightly you hold it. Sleep never came after the memo. I lay awake on the couch until the gray light of dawn. The storm outside had passed, but inside, mine was only beginning. I rose, pulled on a sweater, and moved like someone trespassing in her own life. The folder with the statements waited in my desk. I added copies of bills, invoices, any document tying Mom's finances to Nathan's so-called reimbursements. I photographed every page, uploading them to an encrypted drive I had once used for work. But this time, the stakes were far heavier. Later that morning at Mom's, while she slept upstairs, I slipped into her study. Legal documents filled the cabinet, the Burlington property deed, insurance papers, pension statements. I spread them across the desk, snapped photos, then placed each back exactly where I found it. Protective? Yes, but invasive too. Still, neglect would be worse. Back in Seattle, I combed through my voicemail history, saving every message Nathan had left, some charming, others clipped and cold. Each went into a folder labeled Simply Proof. The final step was tangible. I drove to Burlington and rented a P.O. box 2 blocks from Mom's church. From then on, anything important, bank statements, medical bills, would come through me first. No more missing documents. No more excuses. Standing in the parking lot with the key in my hand, I inhaled the sharp morning air. Leaving at dawn hadn't been about running away. It was about mapping the battleground before Nathan even knew a fight had begun. Driving back toward Seattle, the pale sun rising over the water, I knew it. What began as 27 seconds of betrayal was already rewriting every hour of my life that followed. The folder grew thicker each day. But evidence without direction is just clutter. I needed someone who could transform it into something undeniable. That's what brought me to a brick office near Pioneer Square, where an elder law attorney named James Carter agreed to meet. I laid everything out, the memo, the withdrawals, the paper trail. When I slid the copies across his desk, his expression hardened, though his tone stayed calm. He explained fiduciary duty in plain terms. Anyone responsible for handling parents' finances must always be managed with their best interests at heart. Any misuse, especially for personal gain, can easily cross into financial exploitation. Guardianship, the attorney explained, would only be required if a court determined a parent was incapable of handling their own affairs. But that wasn't the issue in our case. The danger wasn't incapacity. It was trust placed in the wrong child. I left his office with a checklist, gathered dates, matching bank records, samples of Nathan's handwriting, and testimony from anyone who had noticed irregular behavior. That same afternoon, I began making calls. Mom's visiting nurse who handled her prescriptions remembered Nathan insisting on paying cash for medications already covered by insurance. She agreed to write a statement. Ellen, the church treasurer, a reserved woman, told me she had questioned Nathan about large withdrawals that showed up as donations from Mom's account. He brushed her off, but she was willing to put it in writing. Finally, I went to the bank. At Northfield Savings, I sat across from the branch manager who had known our family for years. When I mentioned Nathan's LLC, his eyebrows lifted. He quietly pulled up the records, confirmed the automatic withdrawals, and printed the statements, each stamped officially. By evening, my dining table was buried under piles of documents. Each page was another piece of evidence, another brick in a wall Nathan couldn't talk his way around. For years, I had let his words go unchallenged. But now, I held something stronger than anger. I had proof. Proof that would speak louder than my voice ever had. I stacked everything into a binder, closed the cover firmly, and knew it was time to take the truth directly to Mom. I suggested a weekend getaway, just the two of us, under the guise of giving her a change of scenery. Bar Harbor in early spring was peaceful, the shops along the boardwalk still quiet, the ocean air sharp with salt. We rented a small cottage overlooking the water. The first day, I let her relax. We cooked chowder together, strolled the docks, and watched gulls circling the lobster boats. On the second evening, as the fire dwindled and her hands rested quietly in her lap, I reached for my phone. "Mom," I said softly, "there's something you need to hear." I pressed play. Nathan's voice filled the room. Casual, confident, cutting. "Scarlett just isn't reliable. She's unstable, careless. You need to transfer everything to me. She doesn't have the judgment for this." When the recording ended, silence weighed heavier than the tide outside. Mom blinked, her lips pressed tight. "He means well," she murmured finally. "You know how he exaggerates when he's worried." I slid the binder across the table. Page after page, bank records, nurses' notes, signed statements. "This isn't exaggeration," I said. "This is what he's been doing." She turned each page slowly, her shoulders tense. For every date I pointed out, she searched my face, hoping to see hesitation. I gave her none. The evidence carried the weight my words never had. Her expression softened, but not toward me. It was sorrow, not anger. "He's my son," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I can't just cut him off." "I'm not asking you to disown him," I said gently. "I'm asking you to see the truth." She closed the binder, her palm resting on it as though it were glass. After a long silence, she looked at me. "I need time." It wasn't the victory I had hoped for, but it cracked the wall Nathan had built. For the first time, Mom had heard his words without his smile to hide them. And in that silence, I felt the beginning of a reckoning. Later, the invitation came, not from Nathan, but through Mom. He had arranged a family brunch in Seattle at a waterfront restaurant. When I arrived, he was already seated beside her, his arm draped across her chair, his smile wide and practiced. The first half hour was pure theater. He ordered for her, joked about my late nights, then shifted his tone. "I worry about Scarlett," he said, loud enough for everyone. "She's been stressed, maybe even paranoid. She thinks there are problems with Mom's accounts, but it's just overwork." Mom didn't challenge him. She sipped her coffee, eyes lowered, nodding faintly. For a moment, I felt the ground tilt. His words smooth enough to erase the weekend in Bar Harbor, smooth enough to make me doubt whether the binder even mattered. But I was ready. From my bag, I pulled notarized letters from Northfield Savings, each stamped with official seals. Then I laid out a sheet of timestamps proving Nathan's withdrawals matched dates when he told Mom he was paying expenses for her. I set them on the table without a word. Our cousins leaned forward. Aunt Linda adjusted her glasses to read. Mom looked torn, her face stricken. Nathan's mask cracked. His voice rose, sharp. "This is manipulation. Scarlett has always been jealous. She doesn't understand responsibility." His hand slammed the table, rattling the silverware. No one rushed to calm him. They only stared, watching as the polished act he'd worn for years began to shatter. I gathered the letters back into my bag, my pulse steady as Nathan stood exposed in front of the very people he had brought as witnesses. For the first time, the room no longer bent to his version of events. It bent to the truth, and the silence no longer weighed on me. The fallout from that brunch spread faster than I imagined. Within a week, Northfield Savings froze all transfers linked to Nathan's LLC, citing suspicious activity under review. The money that used to vanish quietly from Mom's account now sat under scrutiny, every withdrawal flashing like a warning signal. James, the attorney, acted quickly. He filed an emergency motion for accounting, demanding a court order that forced Nathan to disclose how he had handled Mom's funds. "It's just the first step," James told me, but enough to make him sweat. Not long after, Ellen, the church treasurer, reached out. She said the board had decided to suspend Nathan's proposed charity fund until they could verify the sources of the contributions. Her words were careful, but the message underneath was clear. Their trust in him was gone. Nathan didn't disappear. Instead, he called late at night, his voice low and sharp with anger. "You don't know what you've started, Scarlett. You think you're helping her? You're ruining everything." I let him speak, let his fury pour out, while my phone sat recording on the table beside me. Every threat, every slip in his temper became another file marked as evidence. I didn't argue back. My silence rattled him more than words ever could. By the third call, his anger had shifted to begging, but I kept recording and I kept my distance. Mom felt the change too. She didn't say it outright, but I could hear it in her voice when she lingered longer on the phone, asked careful questions, and sought reassurance. The doubt that had once silenced her at brunch was giving way to something heavier: recognition. I stored the recordings alongside the bank letters, the binder growing heavier by the day. I knew soon the weight would be too much for Nathan to carry. The decision came quietly, without drama. Mom sat across from me in a Burlington law office, hands folded in her lap, as the trustee read the terms. Every asset, her house, her accounts, even the modest pension she had guarded since Dad's death, was moved into a living trust, managed by 2 independent attorneys. Nathan's name was wiped from the paperwork, as if it had never existed. From then on, nothing could move without dual oversight. When Mom signed the papers, she exhaled like she had been holding her breath for years. In that moment, she looked both older and lighter. Later that afternoon, back at the house, she led me into her study. Without a word, she opened a drawer and pulled out a small brass key. She pressed it into my hand. "It's for the cabinet," she said softly. "Everything important is inside. I want you to have it." The weight of that key carried more than access. It was trust finally given without conditions. Nathan arrived soon after, slamming the door so hard the frames on the wall shook. When Mom told him about the trust, his face turned red, his voice rising in a storm of accusations. He looked to our aunts and cousins for backup, but no one moved. Their silence this time wasn't fear, it was refusal. He stormed out, the sound of the door echoing down the hall. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel small in his shadow. I stood in Mom's study, the brass key warm in my palm, knowing the ground had shifted for good. What remained wasn't just protection, but the map of a new life I would choose for myself. Months later, my days no longer carried the weight of constant defense. I signed the lease on a modest apartment near Puget Sound, its windows opening to the harbor where the tide rose and fell free of anyone's control. It was mine, paid for with my own earnings, untouched by Nathan or Mom's accounts. The walls around me finally belonged to me. I kept the brass key on a hook by the door, not because I needed it, but because it reminded me of the moment trust was placed in my hands. Mom stayed in the old house, her care now supported by clear safeguards. Our conversation softened. We spoke less about Nathan and more about recipes, the garden, and the choir she had rejoined. She no longer asked me to shoulder her worries in silence. From the struggle, something new emerged. With help from Ellen and legal aid, I started a small community fund for caregivers covering transport, medication gaps, and respite hours for those caring for aging parents. Donations were modest, but each one carried the promise that others would never feel as cornered as I once had. Sometimes, when I walk along the Sound in the early morning, I think back to that dawn when I copied documents in secret. I know now it wasn't an escape. It was the first line on a map. Each step since has connected to the next, building a route no one else could claim. I didn't leave to run away. I left to write the plan in ink, so it could never be erased. Looking back, I've learned that silence can be as much a prison as it is a shield. For years, I let Nathan's words define my place in the family, believing compliance would keep the peace. But his betrayal, captured in that 27-second memo, taught me that truth demands a voice, even when it shakes. Gathering the evidence, bank statements, voicemails, notarized letters, was never just about exposing him. It was about reclaiming my own story. Each step, from confronting Mom to securing the trust, showed me that real strength doesn't come from rage, but from clarity and proof. That brass key wasn't simply access to a cabinet. It was Mom's trust, hard-earned, and a reminder that love survives only when it is honest. Starting the Caregiver Fund showed me that pain can plant the seed of purpose, giving others the support I once lacked. Now, when I walk along Puget Sound, I understand choosing truth over silence drew a path no one can erase. My lesson is simple: when you hold the evidence of your worth, no one can rewrite your story. And before you go, don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more stories like this one.